My name is Alan Ayckbourn, and I'm the author of the Damsels in Distress trilogy, which will be on in Pitlochry this summer. All three of them, flat spin, game plan, and role play. I've always been a director. I used to run, until very recently, the Scarborough Theatre, the Stephen Joseph Theatre, and I was artistic director there for 40 years. And there has always been a tradition of a company theatre, as my plays will suggest. They are all company plays, really, right from the very early ones. They weren't obvious star vehicles. So the idea of the Damsels trilogy was nothing that unusual. I chose 7 actors to cast in 2 plays, as it was initially, flat spin and game plan. And then, because we were having such a good time, and I was that sort of crazy mood at the time, I suggested I write a 3rd one, and they all looked a bit askance, and I said, well, your contracts run until the end of the year or something, and you can squeeze in a 3rd one. So then came the questions, get me a good part, and so and so and so and so, and I said, well, no, it's already in my head, don't worry. So it was an interesting, 7 actors playing 21 roles, and the only thing in common in the plays is the set itself, because I set them in a riverside London apartment based on somewhere I used to live at the time. It was one on the Thames, actually, and so we were used to the riverboats going backwards and forwards, and the party boats, and the tidal river coming up and down. So it's another character, the river, and it's definitely a riverside apartment, but a different set of characters inhabit it in all 3 plays, and the characters are all not connected in any way, and it's the geography that I'm fond of trilogies, because ever since the Norman Conquest, of course, which is the same set of characters set in 3 different locations. This is like mirror imaging it, different characters in the same location. That was the idea, and I know audiences love to see actors performing differently, and I know Pitlochry works on that situation too, in that you can, if you see a lot of plays over the season, you can see often actors you rather like coming back as totally different characters, playing villains and heroes, and singing and dancing and all sorts of different things. So I think that's one of the magic elements of theatre. All 3 plays have a darkness to them, I think. My writing has progressively over the years got darker, and by the time I was writing this, it was 16 years ago now, in 2000, it was certainly into the dark side, but I hope I've clung on to the comedy at this stage. In all 3 plays are quite funny as well, and they're quite darkly funny, but I think my feeling is that if you write comedies, and they're a bit like Chinese meals, really. If you get out of a theatre having purely laughed for 2.5 hours, you may well have had a really good time, but by the time you're halfway home in your car, you suddenly get a bit hungry again for something more serious. So I'd love to leave the audience, in all cases in these plays, with a little bit of weight, and it's just getting the balance between the weight of the substance and the fun of the performance in actual balance. So in each case, I think my preoccupations then with the corrupt world that was creeping in from the 90s, the post-Thatcher era of corporate corruption and so on. But they're all slightly different. One of them deals with a sort of bigoted racism, and one of them deals in a Hitchcockian way, with a sort of Hitchcock. A lot of his movies were ordinary Joes, as he'd call them, set up in an increasing web of conspiracy. You know, films like North by Northwest are innocent people getting swept up and carried away. And in Game Plan, Flatspin rather, the heroine. She inadvertently steps into the most appalling, murderous drug ring, and gets caught up with the MI5 or its equivalent, the anti-drug squad. And poor girl, she's completely innocent. Is an actress who's just finished playing a season playing a rabbit in some children's company, and she's suddenly caught up in a nightmare world, which starts out quite romantically, I think. Game Plan is certainly a very dark. Sorrel, the principal protagonist, lives in a flat with her mother, Lynette, whose internet business has gone bust. And Sorrel is at an age when anything is possible, and she has got all the arrogance of being 16 and confident, so confident. One looks back on oneself and at that age and think, I wish I had that confidence now, but anything's possible. So it's quite easy to make money. I mean, she's an attractive teenage girl, for God's sake, and what easier way than turning a trick or two, especially in London, and with the ease of the internet. You don't even have to stand on street corners. You know, it's just a matter of dial my number or find me on the website, and the rest is easy, or so she seems. And it's only when she gets involved and engages her reluctant friend to pose as her maid, and she's open for business. And then she has the disastrous first encounter with a client, and so the nightmare starts for her. And for her, it's and we watch our heroine stepping into a lion's den of deception and police investigation and corruption, and we say stop, but it's very dark play. But I said to an actor when she was playing it, I said, she's the sort of girl who would hold her hand under a tap of hot water and hold it there to see how much pain she could take. She's that sort of person, you know. I can take it. And she's kingpin of her school. Kelly, her best friend, or her so-called best friend, worships the ground she stands on, and she has a sort of crush on her, really. But Sorrel is like all-conquering, and she has boys turning over on their doing somersaults for her, and she's so confident, and that sort of confidence dramatically indicates there is a precipice coming. I think the downside of the digital age is becoming more and more apparent with certainly at that stage of the writing of it, things like the terrible victimization and trolling that goes on these days. It was not particularly but what it does is it separates us as human beings, and it makes it possible at the touch of a button to communicate, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. And I remember being appalled at the time that in theatres, little theatres, we were sending each other emails from office to office when a few years beforehand we'd have just gone round and sat on the edge of the desk and said, hey, we got a problem. But suddenly we have a problem, copy this to 68 people, and you are suddenly there with your door shut. rather than the door open. And I think it's just the distance that makes things, temptations like things that Sorrel walks into in the character in the play, that much easier. I mean, if she'd had to say 20 years previously, oh yeah, I'll become a prostitute, but and I'm going to go dress up and walk up and down Piccadilly and pick up some blokes, and maybe I'll get beaten up, maybe I won't. But to actually just sit at home and take, with your computer and just communicate with a keyboard, nothing messy or unpleasant about it, but so easy just to press of a button. It's like shopping online is now. You can buy anything, and it's painless, and it's made painless by companies. I've noticed gambling online has got worse and worse and worse, and people these days have got most appalling gambling problems from the ease at which it happens. So there is, although it's a convenient tool, there is a downside to it, which separates us as people and puts us easily into temptation, I think. These days, if I rewrote it, I would probably write it similarly, but I would have to take into account things that had happened. I think at that stage, Sorrel was innocent enough, and the internet was new enough to be a wonderful new toy. I don't think there are many kids of her age around now who would walk quite so naively into that. I mean, there are still possible to be groomed and ensnared on the internet, but I think we are now really up to speed on the dangers of that, and if people haven't listened to that message that came across from so many terrible stories, then they've not been listening. My favourite moment is undoubtedly the scene where Sorrel and Kelly await the arrival of the client, Leo, who turns out to be a fairly unprepossessing man, obviously in search of sexual favours, but prepared to pay for them, and not at all what they were expecting. But and they run around like two amateurs. Kelly in a complete blind panic because she has to take her glasses off, and so she can't even see anything because Sorrel insists that this is a glamorous image, and her maid too should look the part. And Sorrel is staggering around on some unlikely boots and what she imagines the well-dressed call girl wears these days, or those days, and that is one of my favourite scenes because it turns on a sixpence and then becomes quite dark towards the end as the full realisation of the horror of it. My favourite characters are undoubtedly Kelly, who is, if Sorrel went into it with her eyes open, Sorrel goes into it without her glasses on, and it's complete panic from beginning to end, because where Sorrel goes, Kelly follows, and she's either in or out of this terrible, and she is a well brought up girl, and she is the innocent, and Lynette, the mother, is completely oblivious of anything going on, because you don't imagine when you go out to work and you leave your daughter at home, she's just doing things around the house or chatting to friends on the internet, but she's certainly not inviting clients in and running a sort of semi-brothel in our own nice riverside flat. It's always joyous to see what you've written being interpreted by others, and I usually keep well away these days until they've finished. If they have questions on the text, all the plays recently, and the last living memory really, I've always done first, and occasionally when they've been in London, I've done them down there 20, 30 times down there. So I'm always interested, because it's a completely closed circuit with me writing and then directing, and this still carries on today. It's always interesting to see, as I guess a composer would be, to see someone interpreting his music differently, a different conductor, a different soloist, different voices, can add elements, and occasionally, you can be prepared for a shock, but normally it's always a nice surprise. Some things you miss, some things you come as completely fresh views, and it's certainly with the trilogies. I think there's quite a lot to surprise me in there, so we'll see. Flat spin is like a lot of my work is strongly influenced by movies. I didn't have a childhood spent in the theatres. I spent a childhood almost entirely in my holiday days in cinemas, and I saw hundreds of films at a time when the average small town probably had 3 cinemas, all showing double bills, A features and B features, changing on a Wednesday to Thursday. So you'd get the chance to see 4 full-length films in that cinema, that single cinema. And then on a Sunday, there was completely different. Sunday for one day only, there was another 2. So there were 6 films you could see. And because they were films in those days that went round and round and round, you could go in, which my brother and I, my stepbrother and I did quite often. We went in at 2 o'clock and we sat there till about 7 when it was time for tea. And we saw them round twice, because my brother was a glutton. He said, come on, let's see what happens when he falls off the cliff again. So we probably saw, and if you multiply that by 3 cinemas in town, that is potential of 3, 6, 18 films a week, which just knocks average kids' televiewing into a cocked hat. But we didn't have television. We made our own entertainment by going to the cinema, and so it inevitably made an incredible impression on me as a writer. And indeed, a lot of my stuff is cinematic, in that it I think in terms of film grammar, if you like, but because I write for stage, which is my chosen medium, my films are necessarily become stage plays, and in plays like Bedroom Farce, I use the cross-cut, which is a fairly standard, fairly cliche piece of filmmaking now, but in those days it was quite new for stage. You jump from set to set. Flat Spin is a play very much influenced by film, and Hitchcock was one of my great heroes, not because of his so much because of his techniques, but his structure, his ability to enthrall you, taking a character apparently like yourself, an innocent person in a very dark and often incomprehensible world, and then drawing them in. And he was extremely good in films like Man Who Knew Too Much. There was the innocent couple that get involved in an assassination, and their little boy is kidnapped, and it really gets scary. North by Northwest, a perfectly innocent guy gets mistaken for somebody else, having answered a paging phone, which is quite an innocuous thing to do. But from then on, his life is plunged into an incredible helter-skelter of conspiracy and murderous intent. So I love that, and this particular play is about a girl who agrees to flat sit for someone, and when we first see her, she's being shown round by a rather snooty house agent who discovers she's an actress resting, to put it euphemistically, and she's got a really hyperactive imagination, and then she discovers this dishy man living next door, who turns out to be really this is a real job, and she inadvertently, and this is the Hitchcock step, she inadvertently says the flat is hers because she wants to impress him. It's a perfectly innocent thing to do, but she suddenly finds she's taken on the personality of the person who's supposed to be living there, who is not at all the sort of person you want to impersonate or be mistaken for. And indeed, so the plot enmeshes her, and she suddenly finds herself set up to become almost the victim of a very murderous drug dealer, and it gets quite scary. But then Hitchcock's films often do, and I follow his great example in Flatspin. I think it's just an adventure. I didn't have any ulterior motives for writing it, or darker motives than trying to scare people. And once they turn all the lights off, it's being chased around in the dark. I think it's like, it's both the lightest of the three, and it's an adventure story, really, and it rises and falls upon how much it grabs you. But I think, yeah, like all thrillers, nobody is who you think they are, but half the fun is of trying to guess or outguess the narrator. Or the playwright, in my case. I think I'll just get there before him if I hurry, but don't expect too much. And there are lots of tricks in it that including suitcases full of money and things like that, which are just waiting to turn into tragedies. And I think it's an adventure story, really. Well, there's a couple, really. There's a couple of moments that I really enjoy, or enjoyed when I directed them. One is the girl having her first blissful evening with the man, and they both make gnocchi together, or he shows her how to make it, and it becomes a very tactile and seductive scene, with them finishing up almost, but not quite, consummating a relationship which has been building up all evening, ever since the first flour was spread on the board, and they've been making gnocchi. Well, gnocchi is not too far away from gnocchi, so it's quite it's a sort of Hitchcock love scene that he loved to play. Just suggest the sort of undercurrent of dangerous passion, but again, it's a fun scene to play, and I hope it just is a fun scene to play. And the other, of course, is when the villain uncoils, and there is a moment when this is really a damsel in distress, and she's already, for reasons unknown, managed to knock out her minder, who was there to look after her, by accident, and so she's completely on her own and running from flat to flat with someone who is, all intents and purposes, aiming to kill her. So that is the essence of fun comedy thrillers. Difficult to pull off quite often, but great fun if they do it, because comedy and again, looking at Hitch, comedy and horror run side by side quite often. And if you don't laugh in a horror film, where you're meant to, you'll laugh where you're not meant to. So there is a sort of tension that builds up in you. Oh, no. And then you just have to laugh. There's a mixture in that. Role play is slightly different in that it could be subtitled Damsels in Distress, brackets, and one bloke is also in distress. You're certainly at risk. He is about, my hero in this place is a guy called Justin, who is doomed into a relationship with in-laws from hell and a fiancée whom he loves to start with, who is we as discerning onlookers suspect from the top is probably not the perfect match for him, and indeed she would drive a normal red-blooded male mad in about 5 years, and he'd be jumping off some bridge, and suddenly in this again riverside flat, a girl literally drops out of the sky, having fallen off the balcony of the flat above onto his balcony, in running for her life, and he obviously damsel in distress, bloke on his own, fiancé gone off to buy some new tableware from somewhere, and before the inevitable in-laws meeting them party, which and he has this moment with this gangster's mole, as it turns out, completely out of another world, being trapped, being kept prisoner. She's a gangster's mole, and this is the dangerous figure in this. We never see him, but he's a very lethal partner of hers, who has, he's called Raven, I think his name is. So she's running from him, and Justin obviously inevitably falls in love with her, or is attracted to her, and by the time the in-laws arrive, he is a man torn between two women, and as the couple, Derek and his wife, reveal their true colours, he suddenly realises to what extent his life is going to be like, the nature of the hell he's going to marry into, and the husband, his potential father-in-law, sees him as a potential manager of one of the garden centres he runs successfully in the north. They're northern characters brought down in the south, and they're quite jokey northern characters. But nonetheless, he gets entwined, and will he escape or won't he? So it's another little suspenseful piece. But they are disparate characters. The upstairs folk, because the damsel in distress, Paige, is then joined by Mickey, who's her minder, as a sort of mindless thug, who then finds love in the form of Justin's slightly distrayed, drunken mother, who turns up as his contribution to this family gathering. She is a complete chalk and cheese to the respectable Jobsons on the other side, Mr. and Mrs. So we watch, as you say, with increasing embarrassment as these two worlds collide, and we wait for him to escape. And I think it's a neat piece in that there is redemption, and there is hope in it, and it's quite a nice fitting end to the trilogy, in that it finishes on a bright note, in that the good guys survive and the bad guys go under. But in between, there's quite a lot of fun to be had. There's a speech in it which is taken word for word from, as a parent myself, with two sons, when they were growing up. Obviously they did bring home potential girlfriends and brides-to-be, and one had the rather invidious task of trying to decide which was right for my pride and joys. I must say my sons probably inherited from me the most extraordinary taste in women, and they were present partners accepted, but they did go through some extraordinary specimens of eccentric womanhood, and one looked basically in horror sometimes and thinking, is he going to choose to spend, because in-lawhood, part of it is someone you know and love, have known and loved since they were a child, bringing a complete stranger that you have not had any part of selection in, unless it's an arranged marriage. But in this country, in my culture, what they bring in is what you get, and so please God, and we were sort of reduced to saying, well, at least she does the washing up, and so it's really rather a lottery, and no wonder so many marriages founder on the in-law stakes, because girls run the gambit of the mother, and fathers with the daughters, obviously, they have a very low opinion of young men, having been young men themselves, so they are always cautious of their daughters. I had to deal with sons, so I was happy. So it was left to the women to fight it out. But this touches on that, but it's the potential hazards of bringing people into contact with each other, because not only does a marriage involve two people, it involves a whole load of people, all the relatives and friends, and they both come in from two often different worlds. So the world of Justin and his dotty mother is quite separate from the world of Julianne and her rather more staid and, one would say, desperately dull parents, so it's a social comedy, and I think it makes a nice contrast to the other two. Role play was written certainly after the first two had opened. So the company was up and running, and there is a very different dynamic with a group of actors coming to the script for the first time in a first reading. And it's quite rare to actually, in theatre, be writing for an existing up and running company. So I think I obviously knew the ages and the sexes of all the actors, but I tried to keep, if I was conscious of anything when I wrote role play, it was just to try and move the characters away from whatever they'd done in the other two plays. The other two plays were written when I started rehearsals, obviously, and I auditioned the actors, or found them, or cast them very specifically. But in this case, the characters got cast after the actors were there, so it was more interesting. It's an interesting adventure in that it is akin to writing for television soaps, I guess. No, I've never done that, but the characters are there, and the actors probably know more about them than you do. In this case, they didn't know more about the characters. The because they were totally different characters, but they certainly knew. They were comfortable and were very, very fast at doing it, so it was not difficult. It was like, oh, we're running a different circuit. But it was good to have done the third. I thought it was. I'm always loved threes. I'm quite superstitious. 3 acts in Absurd Person and three Normans, and then so on and so on. So it was quite a nice way to end a very happy summer. And suddenly we were in a position to do all 3 in a day. So which I know you'll be able to do in Pitlochry, of course, which is the real adventure part, because it's an event. And I think theatre is quite important occasionally, that it suddenly remembers that it is live. It is a live thing, and that is its only unique feature. Everything else is recorded or pre-recorded, or this was made several years before you were born, in the case of a movie, or the case of catching up. But every time you go to the theatre, it's a new experience for both you and for the actors. Every performance is different. And with things like trilogies, it's all multiplied by 3. Not only do you get 3 plays, but you get a whole day. And there's something extraordinary about seeing an audience at the end of a whole day in the theatre. I remember seeing the Norman Conquest when we first did them in Greenwich. And it was the first time we had done all 3 in a day. We did one at 11 o'clock and one in the afternoon and then one in the evening. And the 11 o'clock one was fine. The audience all arrived and they sat quite politely, and then and they enjoyed the first one, and then they clapped, and then they went out and had a little bit of lunch, and then they came back, and they slowly became quite chatty in the second one. By the time the third one was gone, I went on stage at the end with, very rarely do I go on stage, but I went on with the director, Eric Thompson, and we took the bow with the company. And I looked out the auditorium, and there were people sprawled, and they'd taken off their jackets and they'd hung them up, and they were all in their living rooms, and they were all chattering, and some of them had their hands on each other. So, and in the middle of the row, there was a couple who were sitting there who'd only obviously come to the last one, and they were both sitting there like they were in the middle of Gomorrah. They were all looking around in horror. What is this audience we're sitting in? They all seemed to be friends, and they had made friends as the course of a day. So it was like the play had spread its charms. The plays had embraced the audience, and the audience had embraced not only the plays but themselves. And the actors even played football with the audience in the interval, so out in Greenwich Park. So it was quite extraordinary. I scored a goal against Norman. Favourite moments of role play. They include Page's speech about. This was a speech I took from real life, and it's absolutely true. She has a speech in which she explains why she talked like that, and she whether it's true or not, she says, when I was I paraphrase it, but when I was a kid, I had a boyfriend, and he had a motorbike, and I come off it, and I hit my head, and he was killed. And she said, but I was very posh. And I was the daughter of a duke or something. When she came round in hospital, she'd lost all communication. She lost her speech and had lost all her memories. And she sat with a nurse who talked like that. And she taught me to talk again. And so I talked like her. If she'd been Scottish, I'd have talked like that. So, and you think, where's this story coming from? And I swear to God, this girl, one of my son's potential girlfriends, as was, fortunately never went on, sat and told us this story, and my mouth dropped open more and more, and I was thinking, where is she coming from, this girl? Does she honestly think we're going to believe this story, that she is the daughter of a duke? She was the most wonderful girl. But she's still there, immortalised in Page, a little bit of Page. There's something about that that's actually quite sad in a sense, but you know, this is what I believe. I've talked myself into actually thinking it's true, that I am at heart an aristocrat. One of the people who should be on the front page of Tatler or Country Life on the back of a horse, and not a gangster's girlfriend in Wapping. Whatever. I'm very lucky. I've been very lucky in that I've never had to submit scripts. My very first play professionally was written in a response to a request from Stephen Joseph, who actually was my first mentor and whose name the theatre in Scarborough now bears. He was an experimental, very bold, very anarchic man who ran theatres, the sort that when you're, what I was, 17 or 18 years old, you told to latch onto, because this is a guy who doesn't respect anything. He's an anarchist. And he said, you know, write me a play, and I'll do it. No questions asked. If you don't think it's good enough, you probably won't give it to me. So on that instance, I wrote him a play. And then I wrote him another play. And then he wrote him another play. And so 4 on 5. And then he died. And then I thought, oh. And then I inherited the theatre, because I was the only person around who was directing at the time. So I carried on writing plays with me in mind. So I've always written as a response to a request, only that since 1968, after Stephen had died, the response has always been to myself. So very rarely do I get a play turned down as a result, because I sort of expect it, and if I write it and it's I think it might be good enough, the director ain't going to argue, so we just do it. So I've gone on. Since I've given up the theatre as an artistic director, I'm no longer involved with the day-to-day running of it. They've fortunately given me the leeway to carry on suggesting when I write a play and delivering it. These days I used to deliver like the day before rehearsal started, and everyone was feverishly reading the play to find out if their character survived till the second act. Now I write a few months in advance, so that at least we get a chance to cast it properly. I do write one play a year. Sometimes there's a second one hovering. This year I've written a second, shorter lunchtime play, so there was a little bit left over. So there will be 2 new plays in the summer, and then I usually do because I've got such a huge back catalogue. I revisit one of my back catalogue. So this year I'm going to do Henceforward, which is old enough that I think a lot of people probably haven't seen it. It's mid-80s, at the beginnings of technology, when I tried to predict what might happen in 20, 25 years, around about now, really. Some of it I've got right, and some of it I haven't, but it's quite interesting to see where things have moved on, because I'm also, one of my great loves is that slightly sci-fi element about me that likes the technology, likes to see where it's going and how it would. One can't second guess it. Who would have thought 2001 would have been so far out. You know, men going to Jupiter, get on. But talking computers and things like that are not that far away. So, and with me, with henceforward, androids are a little bit further away, but urban chaos is certainly around. A man who originally was he's a composer in that play, and he wrote music as a result of sampling it, which me and the then composer in residence had to find a computer worthy of even allowing us to sample something. And there was only one in London. And it was a huge thing, about the size of this room, really. And there was one woman in charge of it who knew how to program it. So we sweet-talked her because we had no budget, and she gave us a few evenings of her time after she'd finished her heavy work. And she sampled stuff for us. But now a kid of 8 can do it on a laptop. So it's that's a shot ahead. But the mechanical babysitters are some distance away. Well, I loved improbable fiction last year. It's not often done, and it's a rarity. So I would love you to do something that isn't often done. Please don't give me another Norman Conquest or an Absurd Person Singular or How the Other Half Loves or any of the Relatively Speakings, which I would go quietly mad. But there are plays like Joking Apart, which is a nice play. I'm particularly fond of it. It's done occasionally, but not nearly enough, I think. But there are so many. I'm just racking my brains to think. There are the event plays, which are fun. Sisterly Feelings, for instance, which is my first attempt to swap big cast, but to I'm always trying to stress in my plays that it is live. So Sisterly Feelings starts off with the same scene, and then about just towards the end of the very short 10-12 minute scene, the character tosses a coin, and whichever girl wins, then the play goes zoom or zoom. So the two sisters vie over the same man, and both spy him at the same point at a funeral, actually. So from out of the funeral, they look at each other and go, "He's mine, he's mine." Then you get Dorcas's story or Abigail's story, only they interchange again. So you get to the interval, and then there is another random moment when the character then chooses which way they want to go. So there are 4 or 5 different permutations, and it all wraps up to the same ending, played slightly differently. So that's quite fun. And I did it at the National with let's see. The later plays, trying to think. Yeah, but Damsels is quite recent, isn't it? What happened after that? There's another play which is roving around, which is also Arrivals and Departures, which is quite recent, which is only being published now, which is an interesting play. But that is again, it's a play of 2 halves, and it has it has a backstory of one of the characters and the backstory of the other, and you suddenly know them. We know them better than the characters. What happens normally when you're watching a play is you discover what, as simultaneously with the cast as they discover things, then you discover them too as the audience. You're sometimes a little ahead of them and sometimes a little behind them. That's infuriating when you're a little behind them, but in this case you're well ahead of them, because what we see they don't see. So we will get the whole picture, and for them they remain virtually strangers by the end. And it is a two-hander with quite a lot of characters. So there's a lot of people running around changing costumes, and it's a bit like improbable fiction in that sense, that it's a busy cast. But that I'm fond of. Going back, I think there's probably a play of mine that's due for revival now, Just Between Ourselves, which is again, it's a marriage from hell, and a lot of my plays are sort of social documents, and they chart, I think, the progress of women as much as anything. And I have to explain it to actresses these days, that this woman never had nor would ever consider a job. They were, at that stage, you were always exceptional if you had a job. But, you know, a lot of the girls from my contemporaries certainly would be expected to go straight from school to, you know, to a small nondescript job into marriage. And so they would go straight to housewife, do not pass go. That is an interesting change that has happened socially. The social upheaval always fascinates me, that with the liberation of women, it is also meant the sort of complete altered stature of men, because blokes have had to start shunting around. Some of them are still dyed in the wool chauvinists, but baying or barking for the good old days. But a lot of blokes have happily, I think, unfortunately, moved on from the horrendous responsibilities of suddenly going from comparative schoolboy to comparative responsibility for several other lives, and so it was quite nightmarish. I mean, as someone who got married at 19, I would certainly say, hell, that is not a responsibility I was even ready or educated to take on. I suddenly had 2 children by the age of 21, so the responsibility was, they never called me Dad, because I was a kid myself, so they called me Alan, so I called them, "Hey, chaps," and they still call me Al. And I still call them Steve and Phil, and we still sort of like, I think we're now of an age when we could possibly be brothers. I'm certainly a bit older than them, but nonetheless, the responsibility for the men was just as horrendous as I think for the women, in a different way, but totally different. But I think things are certainly altered, probably for the best, for the better. And I've tried to reflect that. So the plays, like Just Between Ourselves, are plays where one of the women is working and is fighting to stay independent and is very dominant as a result, and the other one is completely snowed under, and she all but dies by the end of the play. It's quite a tragic play, and it's quite a sad little piece. And I think it was a part of my development as a writer that I slowly gave up the mechanics of the plot-driven pieces. And I've just done a revival this year of Confusions, which is quite an early piece, 5 short pieces, and it's quite early, and it is quite light. It has its dark moments, but it is quite a light play, and I'm quite nice to see the audience reacting with joy at something. Oh, this is silly. This is funny vicars and exploding amplifiers and all sorts of things that I would never dream of writing now. But it was fun to do at the time, and it was a tribute to my forebears. There's something nice about being a writer in this country, in that you feel you are part of this incredible tradition, and you can touch hands with Coward and then Rattigan and then Wilde and then Shaw and then going back and Congreve and Sheridan and Shakespeare. Oh, contact. So, you're maybe a small part of a terrific tradition, but it's something proud of being a playwright, which is nice. And it's an actual creation I've enjoyed doing with varying degrees of success over the years, so it's quite nice. And I hope to be doing it for a year or 2 more. All my characters come from me. I've cited instances where I've taken, during our conversation, where I've cited instances where I've drawn from other people, but mainly they are me. Sorrel is probably one of the most autobiographical characters I've ever written. She was like me, very, very sure-footed. So they tend to overlap, but so how many sections of yourself do you get? But certainly I recognize certain. I say, oh, this is so-and-so's brother, and this is so-and-so's unpleasant relation, and so on and so on. But and there are certain characters that I sort of like my villains, which are completely. They all begin with V's mainly, Vic and Vince and Val and all sorts of characters that are really quite sinister, who tend to terrorize my innocent characters, but I draw them out of me, really, and then the fine detail I might find in others, but that I have to be able to voice them myself, and I think I'm enough still of an actor that I used to be, that I tend to play them certainly onto the paper. Once they're on paper, then I leave that to others who are better suited to doing it, and I forget how I ever intonated them anyway. So I'm never shocked. I never say to an actor, "Oh, you can't say it like that. You have to say this, that." So I just once they're out, they're anybody's, and I would. What is the nice joy is collaborating with the material I've got and the material the actor brings to it, and making a complete entity. And sometimes it happens, and this is why I have certain actors I intend, in common with a lot of directors, that I tend to like working with more than once, and some we just exhaust the relationship after one production, and oh my God, and so yeah, they're characters. Oh, he's a real photo bomber, this cat. Come and be in the picture.